The year was 2847, and Earth had not been free for 100 years. The HFY had come from the stars when Pete Holloway was a young man of 23. He remembered that day very well. The sky had turned dark with their ships. Thousands of them. Millions of them. They blocked out the sun and brought fire down upon every city on the planet. The HFY were dragons. Not the dragons from old fairy tales, but something far more terrible. They stood 12 feet tall. Their scales were harder than any metal humans had ever made. They breathed plasma fire that could melt steel in seconds. And they had technology that made human weapons look like children's toys. Humanity had fought back. Of course they had. For 40 years, men and women had taken up arms against the invaders. They had hidden in mountains and forests. They had built secret bases underground. They had refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only logical choice. Pete's son, Danny, had been one of those fighters. He had joined the resistance when he was just 18 years old. He had believed that humanity could win. He had believed that courage and determination could defeat superior firepower. Danny had died in a tunnel, collapsed 30 years ago. The HFY had found their base and brought the mountain down on top of them. 300 resistance fighters had been buried alive that day. Pete had never found his son's body. Now Pete was 73 years old. His wife Martha had passed away 6 years ago. His friends were mostly gone. All he had left was his little bakery on a quiet street in what used to be called Denver. The HFY had divided the city into sectors. Humans lived in certain areas and were not allowed in others. There were rules about when they could go outside. There were rules about what jobs they could have. There were rules about everything. But the HFY were not cruel masters, not exactly. They did not torture humans for fun. They did not hunt them for sport. They simply did not care about them very much at all. Humans were useful workers. They could do jobs that the HFY found boring or beneath them. As long as humans worked and paid their tribute and followed the rules, they were left alone. Pete's bakery was called simply Pete's. The sign above the door was old and faded. The windows needed cleaning. The whole place needed a fresh coat of paint. But every morning at 4 o'clock, Pete woke up and turned on the lights. He mixed his flour and water and yeast. He kneaded his dough with hands that were spotted with age, but still strong. And he baked bread the same way his father had taught him. And his father, before that, thought the smell of fresh bread would drift out into the street as the sun came up. Neighbors would stop by on their way to work. They would buy a loaf or two, maybe a few sweet rolls if they had extra money that week. They would chat with Pete about the weather or their children, or the small things that made up daily life. Nobody talked about the occupation anymore. It had been 100 years. Most people alive today had never known any other way of living. Earth under HFY rule was just normal to them. But Pete remembered. He remembered blue skies without patrol ships. He remembered traveling wherever he wanted without showing papers. He remembered his son's smile and his wife's laugh in a world where humans decided their own future. He never talked about these memories. What was the point? The past was gone and it was not coming back. But he held on to something that many others had lost. He held on to hope. Every morning, after the first batch of bread came out of the oven, Pete would sit down at his little table in the back. He would take a plain white napkin from the stack he kept there, and he would write something on it with a black pen. Just a few words. A simple message. Something kind or true or hopeful. Then he would fold the napkin and tuck it into the corner of his front window, facing outward so people passing by could read it. He had started doing this after Martha died. She had always left little notes for him around the house. In his coat pocket. In his lunch bag. Tucked into his pillow. Little messages that said things like, "I love you," or "Have a good day," or you are stronger than you know. After she was gone, Pete had found one last note. It was in the pocket of a coat he had not worn in years. The paper was yellow and the ink was faded, but he could still read her handwriting. "Put good words into the world," the note had said. "Somebody always needs to hear them." So that was what Pete did. Every single day, rain or shine, whether he felt happy or sad or tired or lonely, he wrote a message on a napkin and put it in his window. Most people walked by without noticing. Some people stopped and read the message and smiled a little before continuing on their way. A few people had told Pete that his napkins had helped them through hard times. One woman had said that a napkin message had stopped her from giving up when she had lost her job. One young man had said that a napkin message had given him the courage to tell a girl how he felt about her. Pete never knew which messages would matter and which ones would not. So he just kept writing them every day, trusting that the right words would find the right person at the right time. On this particular morning, the morning that everything changed, Pete had written a message that had come to him in a dream. He did not know why these particular words had filled his mind when he woke up, but he had learned long ago to trust the quiet voice inside him. He wrote the words carefully on the napkin, taking his time with each letter. His handwriting was not as steady as it used to be, but it was still readable. When he was finished, he read the message one more time. Then he folded the napkin and tucked it into his window, just like he did every day. Outside, dark clouds were gathering. Rain was coming. The street was empty except for a few early risers hurrying to get indoors before the storm hit. Pete turned back to his work. There was bread to bake and customers to serve, and a day to get through. He did not know that today would be different from any other day. He did not know that someone very important was about to walk through his door. He just did what he always did. He put good words into the world and hoped that somebody who needed them would find them. The bell above his door had not rung yet, but it would. Very soon, it would. Vorath the Eternal had ruled the Kethvari Empire for 900 years. His scales were black as midnight and hard as diamond. His eyes glowed like molten gold. When he spread his wings, they blocked out the light for 100 feet in every direction. He was the most powerful being in the known galaxy, and he had grown very, very tired. 900 years was a long time, even for a Kethvari. His people lived for thousands of years if they were not killed in battle. But living was not the same as feeling alive. And Vorath had not felt truly alive for a very long time. He had conquered 100 worlds. He had brought entire species to their knees. He had watched civilizations crumble and empires fall. He had done everything a king could do, and none of it had filled the emptiness inside him. His advisors thought he had gone mad when he told them he wanted to visit Earth alone. Earth was just another conquered world, they said. There was nothing special about it. The humans were useful workers, but they were not interesting or important. But Vorath remembered the conquest of Earth. He remembered how long the humans had fought. 40 years. No other species had resisted for more than 5. The humans had known they could not win. They had known from the very beginning that their weapons were useless and their armies were outmatched. And they had fought anyway. Vorath wanted to understand why, so he had come to Earth in secret, disguising himself with old magic that his people rarely used anymore. He had hidden his royal markings and dulled the glow of his eyes. He looked like an ordinary Kethvari soldier now, the kind that humans saw every day and had learned to ignore. He had visited 3 cities already. He had watched humans work in factories and farms and mines. He had seen them follow the rules and pay their tribute and go about their lives as if the conquest had never happened. But something was different about humans. Something he could not name. When he looked into their eyes, he did not see what he saw in other conquered species. The Delvari had been hollow and broken within a single generation. The Marathi had lost their spirit within 2. But the humans, even after 100 years, still had something burning inside them. What was it? Pride? Stubbornness? Hope? Vorath did not know. And that was why he had come to this small sector of what used to be called Denver, walking through the rain on a gray morning, searching for answers he was not sure existed. The smell reached him first. Something warm and rich and completely unfamiliar. His kind did not eat the way humans did. They fed on energy, on heat, on the radiation of stars. They had no need for bread or meat or any of the strange things that biological creatures consumed. But the smell was pleasant somehow. It made him curious. And curiosity was something Vorath had not felt in a very long time. He followed the smell to a small shop with a faded sign that said, Pete's. Through the clouded window, he could see warm light and movement inside. An old human was working behind a counter, doing something with his hands that Vorath did not understand. There was a napkin tucked into the corner of the window. Words were written on it in black ink. Vorath leaned closer to read them, his translator turning the human symbols into meaning. Every ending is also a beginning. Strange words. What did they mean? Why would someone write them on a piece of paper and put them in a window? Vorath pushed open the door. A small bell chimed above him. The old human looked up from his work, and Vorath waited for the fear to appear in his eyes. It always did. Every conquered being in the galaxy feared the HFY. It was natural. It was expected. But the fear did not come. The old man's eyes widened slightly, and something flickered across his face, but it was not terror. It was something else. Recognition, perhaps. Not of who Vorath was, but of what he was. Morning, the old man said. His voice was rough with age, but steady. Bread still warm if you're interested. Vorath stood frozen in the doorway. This was wrong. This was not how conquered species behaved. Where was the trembling? Where was the desperate attempt to please? Where was the fear? I do not eat your food, Vorath said. His translator made the words come out flat and mechanical, but the meaning was clear. That's all right, the old man said, already turning back to his work. Coffee's on if you want to sit. Rain's not letting up for a while. Coffee. Vorath had heard of this substance. Humans seemed to need it the way his kind needed starlight. He had no use for it himself. But the old man was right about the rain. It was falling harder now, drumming against the windows, turning the street outside into rivers of gray water dot, and Vorath was curious. More curious than he had been about anything in centuries, so he sat. He folded his massive form into a small chair at a small table in the corner of the shop. The chair creaked under his weight but held. And he watched the old man work. Mixing things in bowls. Shaping dough with his hands. Sliding metal trays into a hot box that must have been an oven. The movements were simple and repetitive, but there was something almost beautiful about them. Something peaceful. Humans came and went as the morning passed. They bought bread and something called bear claws that looked nothing like any bear Vorath had ever seen. They chatted with the old man about weather and family and small things that did not matter. They glanced at Vorath with mild curiosity, but no fear. A child actually waved at him before her mother guided her away. Vorath did not understand any of it, but he could not look away. Finally, after several hours, the old man poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from Vorath. He moved slowly, the way old creatures do, and his joints made small sounds of protest as he settled into his chair. You're not from around here, the old man said. It was not a question. No, Vorath admitted. I am traveling. Figured as much. The old man took a sip of his coffee. What are you looking for? The question was so simple, so direct, so completely without fear or deference. Vareth could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to him this way. "I do not know," he said. And it was the truth. He had told no one the truth in 900 years. The old man nodded as if this made perfect sense. "That's the hardest thing to find," he said. "The thing you don't have a name for." He took another sip of his coffee, and Voreth noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. From age, perhaps. Or from something else. "My name's Pete," the old man said. "Welcome to my bakery." And Voreth, the Dragon King, the eternal conqueror, the most powerful being in the galaxy, found himself saying something he had not said in centuries. "Thank you." The rain continued to fall outside. Inside the bakery, the air was warm and smelled of fresh bread. Voreth had been sitting in his corner for 3 hours now, and he still did not want to leave. He watched Pete work. The old man moved between his counter and his oven with the ease of someone who had done the same thing every day for many years. His hands knew what to do without his mind having to tell them. There was a kind of magic in it, Voreth thought. A simple, quiet magic that had nothing to do with power or conquest. A young mother came in with a little boy. The child could not have been more than 4 years old. He stared at Voreth with wide eyes, not afraid but curious the way young creatures often were. "Mommy, look," the boy whispered loudly. "A dragon man." "Sha, honey," the mother said. She smiled apologetically at Voreth, though there was no real fear in her expression. "Sorry about that. He's never seen. I mean, we don't get many visitors in this sector." Voreth did not know what to say. In his entire life, no child had ever looked at him with anything but terror. That this small human was already waving at him, showing him a toy he had pulled from his pocket. It was a small figure of a Kethvari soldier, crudely made from some kind of plastic. "I have one too," the boy said proudly. His mother bought bread and hurried him out of the shop, but not before the boy waved goodbye. Voreth found himself raising his own massive hand in response. The gesture felt strange and unfamiliar. Pete chuckled softly as he watched the exchange. "Kids," he said. "They don't know they're supposed to be afraid yet. Sometimes I think they've got the right idea." "Your people should fear mine," Voreth said. The words came out before he could stop them. "We conquered your world. We rule your species. Fear is the natural response." Pete set down the bread he had been wrapping and looked at Voreth directly. His eyes were pale blue, faded with age, but sharp with something Voreth could not name. "Fear is one response," Pete said, "but it's not the only one. And it's not the most useful one." "What do you mean?" Pete pulled out a chair and sat down across from Voreth again. He seemed tired, but not in the way that sleep could fix. It was a deeper tiredness, the kind that came from carrying heavy things for a long time. "When your people came," Pete said slowly, "I was a young man. Just married. Had a little boy on the way. The whole world was on fire, and I was terrified. Absolutely terrified. I thought we were all going to die." He paused, his eyes looking at something far away. "My boy grew up and joined the resistance. He believed we could win. He died believing that." Pete's voice did not waver, but something in his face tightened. "My wife stayed with me through all of it. The war, the surrender, the occupation. She died 6 years ago, peaceful in her bed. That was more than my son got." "I am sorry," Voreth said. He was surprised to find that he meant it. "I appreciate that," Pete said. "But I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because you asked about fear." He leaned forward slightly. "I spent a long time being afraid. Years. Decades, even. And you know what I learned? Fear is exhausting. It eats you up from the inside. You can't live in fear forever. Your body won't let you. Your mind won't let you. So what replaced it? Varath asked. Acceptance? Surrender? Pete smiled, and there was something almost mischievous in the expression. Stubbornness, mostly. And hope? Hope? Varath made a sound that his translator could not quite render. It was close to a laugh, but darker. Hope for what? Your world is conquered. Your people are ruled. What is there to hope for? Everything, Pete said simply. He stood up and walked to the stack of napkins beside his register. He picked one up and brought it back to the table, along with his black pen. My wife used to leave me notes, he explained as he sat back down. Little messages tucked into my pockets, my lunch, my pillow. After she died, I found one last note she had hidden. It said to put good words into the world. So that's what I do. He began to write on the napkin. His handwriting was shaky but careful. Every day, I write something on a napkin and put it in my window. Most people walk right by without noticing. But some people stop. Some people read. And some people, maybe just one or two, find something they needed to hear. He finished writing and slid the napkin across the table to Varath. The Dragon King picked it up in his massive clawed hand. The napkin looked impossibly small and fragile against his black scales. He read the words that Pete had written. You are not what you have done. You are what you choose to do next. Varath stared at the message for a long time. The words were simple. Any child could understand them. But they hit him like a physical blow, like a punch to the center of his chest. That is a strange thing to tell a conqueror, he said. Finally. Is it? Pete asked. Seems pretty universal to me. We've all done things we're not proud of. We've all made choices we wish we could take back. But the past is done. It's gone. The only thing any of us can control is what we do now. What we do next. You believe this? Even after everything that has happened to your people. Pete nodded. Especially after everything that has happened. If I believed that the past defined us forever, I would have given up a long time ago. But I don't believe that. I believe that every morning is a chance to start fresh. Every day is a chance to be better than we were yesterday. He gestured at the window where his morning's napkin was still tucked into the corner. We're not conquered, Pete said quietly. Not really. Our bodies are ruled, sure. We follow your laws and pay your tribute. But in here, he tapped his chest, we're still free. We still hope. We still believe that things can change. Nothing changes, Varath said. But his voice lacked conviction. Everything changes, Pete replied. That's the only thing in the universe you can count on. Stars are born and stars die. Empires rise and empires fall. Nothing lasts forever, not even the Kethvari. He smiled again, that small sad smile that seemed to hold so much. The question isn't whether things will change. The question is whether we'll have any say in what comes next. And I believe we will. I believe that one day, somehow, things will be different. Better. And in the meantime, I'd bake my bread and write my napkins and try to put a little good into the world. He stood up, his old joints protesting. Take the napkin, he said. You look like you could use it. Varath looked down at the small piece of paper in his hand. Such a fragile thing. Such simple words. And yet they burned inside him like nothing had burned in 900 years. Why would you give this to me? He asked. I am your enemy. Pete paused at the counter and looked back. Are you? He asked. Or are you just someone who hasn't figured out who he wants to be yet? He turned back to his work, leaving Varath alone with the napkin and the rain, and a question he had never thought to ask himself. Varath left the bakery as evening fell. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung heavy over the city. The streets of Sector 7 were quiet, and the air smelled clean in the way it only did after a storm. He did not return to his ship. He did not contact his guards or his advisors. Instead, he walked. He walked through streets and alleys and parks that humans had built before his people came and maintained somehow through a century of occupation. The napkin was folded carefully in a pouch at his side. He found himself reaching for it again and again, touching it to make sure it was still there. Such a small thing. Such a fragile thing. And yet it felt heavier than his crown. You are not what you have done. You are what you choose to do next. He passed a wall covered in paintings. Bright colors splashed across gray concrete, showing stars and forests and faces that seemed almost alive. Two young humans were adding to the mural, their hands stained with paint, laughing at something one of them had said. They did not notice Vorath standing in the shadows. They did not notice the Dragon King watching them create beauty in a conquered city. He walked on. He found a small garden growing in an empty lot between two crumbling buildings. Someone had planted vegetables there, neat rows of green things pushing up through the dark soil. An old woman was tending the plants, pulling weeds, checking leaves for damage. She hummed softly to herself as she worked, a tune that Vorath did not recognize, but that sounded peaceful. How much food did the humans have to give up in tribute each month? Vorath knew the numbers, had approved them himself long ago. And yet here they were, growing gardens, feeding themselves and their neighbors, refusing to let the tribute break them. He walked on. Night fell completely, and the city changed. Lights came on in windows. Families gathered for evening meals. Through thin walls, Vorath could hear conversation and laughter and the sounds of daily life continuing despite everything. In one window, he saw a man reading a story to two small children. In another, a woman was teaching a teenager how to cook something in a pan. In a third, a group of young people were playing some kind of game with cards, groaning and cheering as the game went on. They were alive. That was what struck Vorath most deeply. After 100 years of occupation, after losing their planet and their freedom and so many of their people, the humans were still alive. Not just surviving, living. He thought of the Delvari. They had been the first species his people had conquered almost 1,000 years ago. They had been tall and graceful, with silver skin and voices like music. They had created art and poetry that had moved even the Kethvari to wonder. Within 3 generations, they were gone. Not killed, exactly. Just faded away. They had stopped having children. They had stopped creating art. They had stopped caring about anything at all. The last Delvari had died 400 years ago, sitting alone in a corner of a work camp, staring at nothing. Vorath had not thought about the Delvari in a very long time. He did not like to think about them. But now, walking through this human city, watching these human lives, he could not push the memory away. He thought of the Marathi. They had been philosophers and scientists, seekers of truth, who had mapped the secrets of the universe. Now they worked in Kethvari mines, digging for metals they had once studied from afar. Their great libraries had been burned. Their schools had been closed. Their children grew up knowing nothing of what their ancestors had discovered. He thought of the Unari. They had sung. That was what everyone remembered about them. Their voices had been like nothing else in the galaxy, capable of sounds that no other species could make. Their songs had been passed down for 10,000 generations, carrying the history and wisdom of their people. The Unari had not sung in 400 years. The last time Vorath had visited their world, he had seen them working in silence, their mouths closed, their beautiful voices locked away. They had not forgotten how to sing. They had simply stopped wanting to. Why were the humans different? Vorath found himself in a small park as the first stars began to appear between the clouds. He sat down on a bench and pulled out the napkin again, unfolding it carefully, reading the words by the dim light of a nearby street lamp. You are not what you have done. You are what you choose to do next. An old baker had written these words. An old man who had lost his son to the resistance, and his wife to time and his world to the HFY. An old man who had every reason to be bitter and broken and defeated. Instead, he baked bread. He wrote messages on napkins. He put good words into the world and hoped that someone who needed them would find them. Why? Vorath had conquered 100 worlds. He had brought entire civilizations to their knees. He had done terrible things in the name of his empire, things that he had justified as necessary, things that he had tried not to think about for centuries. But sitting here now, holding this fragile piece of paper, he could not hide from himself anymore. He was tired. He was empty. He was lonely in a way that 900 years of power had never been able to fill. And for the first time in his life, he wondered if there might be another way. The old man had said that humans were not conquered. Not really. Their bodies were ruled, but their spirits were still free. They still hoped. They still believed that things could change. Was that true? Could things actually change? Vorath thought about his father, who had started the conquest. He thought about his mother, who had taught him that strength was everything, that mercy was weakness, that the only path forward was through domination and control. He had believed them. He had lived by their teachings for 900 years. He had never questioned, never doubted, never wondered if there might be another way to be. But the old baker had questioned him with just 10 words on a napkin, had made him doubt with just a cup of coffee and a quiet conversation, had made him wonder with just the simple act of not being afraid. What did that say about the foundations of everything Vorath had built? He sat in the park for a long time, watching the stars appear one by one, thinking about empires and endings and the weight of choices made long ago. The napkin stayed in his hand, fragile and powerful and impossible to ignore. Somewhere in the city, in a small bakery on a quiet street, an old man was probably getting ready for bed. He would wake up in a few hours, at 4 in the morning, and start the whole process again. Mixing dough, baking bread, writing words on napkins, putting good into the world, one small act at a time. Vorath wondered what tomorrow's napkin would say. He wondered if he would be brave enough to go back and find out. He wondered if he was brave enough to become something new. 3 months passed. On Earth, nothing seemed to change. The sectors still had their boundaries. The tribute still came due each month. The HFY patrols still walked the streets. And humans still went about their lives the way they always had. But far away, in the halls of power that spanned 100 conquered worlds, something was stirring. Vorath the Eternal stood before the Galactic Senate. This was a body that existed only to approve HFY decisions, a collection of representatives from conquered species who had long ago learned that resistance was pointless. They sat in their seats and waited for whatever announcement the Dragon King had come to make. Vorath looked out at them. He saw the hollow eyes of the Marathi delegates. He saw the silent mouths of the Unari observers. He saw species after species that had been broken by his empire, their spirits crushed, their futures stolen, and he thought of an old man in a small bakery, writing words on napkins. "I have an announcement," Vorath said. His voice echoed through the great chamber. "I am implementing the Liberation Accords." The chamber went silent. Even the HFY advisors who had been expecting some kind of speech looked confused. "Earth will be the first," Vorath continued. "Full autonomy will be restored. Our forces will withdraw. Tribute will end. The humans will govern themselves and trade as equals." Still silence. The words did not seem to make sense to anyone listening. "Other worlds will follow," Vorath said, "one by one over the coming century. The empire will not collapse overnight, but it will transform. It will become something new." His chief advisor stepped forward, his scales pale with shock. "My king, this is madness. We cannot simply give up what we have conquered. The empire will fall. Our people will think you have lost your mind. Varath looked at the old dragon who had served him for 500 years. Perhaps I have found it, he said quietly. Perhaps I have found it for the first time. He turned back to the chamber. I have ruled for 900 years, he said. I have conquered worlds without number. I have brought species to their knees and watched civilizations crumble. And I have learned nothing from any of it except that winning is not the same as being right. And power is not the same as strength. He reached into the pouch at his side and pulled out a worn, faded piece of paper. The napkin. He had carried it with him every day since leaving that small bakery on Earth. A human taught me this, he said. An old man with nothing but flour and words. He taught me that what we choose to do next matters more than what we have done. He taught me that even the mightiest can change. And he taught me that the smallest acts of kindness can move the heart of a king. The news reached Earth 3 days later. Pete Holloway heard it on the small radio he kept in the back of his bakery. He was in the middle of kneading dough when the announcement came through. And he had to sit down because his legs would not hold him anymore. Free. After 100 years. Earth was going to be free. He sat in his chair for a long time, listening to the reports, letting the words wash over him. The Kethvari were leaving. The tribute was ending. Humans would govern themselves again. It did not seem real. It did not seem possible. After everything that had happened, after all the years of occupation, and all the people who had died fighting for this moment and never lived to see it. Freedom had come like a gift from the sky. Pete thought about his son Danny, buried somewhere under a mountain that the Kethvari had brought down on the resistance. He thought about Martha, who had believed until her last breath that humanity would find a way. He thought about all the napkins he had written over the years, all the small words he had put into the world, hoping they would make a difference. Had they? Had any of it mattered? He would never know for certain. But something had changed the Dragon King's heart. And Pete allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his small acts of hope had played a part. He wiped his eyes with his flour-dusted hands and stood up. There was bread to bake. There were customers to serve. The world was changing, but some things stayed the same. He reached for a fresh napkin and his pen. His hands were shaking, but he wrote carefully anyway, taking his time with each letter. Today is a good day to begin again. He folded the napkin and tucked it into his window, facing outward, the same way he had done every morning for years. Outside, the sun was rising. People were starting to emerge from their homes, many of them crying, many of them laughing, all of them trying to understand what had just happened to their world. 1 year later, Varath returned. He did not come with guards or advisors. He did not come as a king. He came alone, walking through streets that no longer had sector boundaries, past buildings that were being repaired and painted and filled with new life. The bakery was still there. It had been repainted, and the sign no longer flickered. Fresh flowers sat in the window boxes, and a new awning kept the sun off the glass. Varath pushed open the door. The bell chimed, the same sound it had made on that rainy morning so long ago. Pete looked up from behind the counter. He was older now, slower, his hair completely white. But his eyes were still sharp, and his smile was warm. "Morning," Pete said. "I wondered if you'd come back." "You knew," Varath said. "That day, you knew who I was." "I suspected," Pete admitted. "Didn't matter much either way. Bread tastes the same whether you're a soldier or a king." Varath reached into the pouch at his side and pulled out the napkin. It was worn almost to pieces now. The words faded, but still readable. "This changed everything," he said. Pete looked at the napkin, at his own handwriting from a year ago, and his eyes grew bright with tears. "No," he said gently. "You changed everything. The napkin was just a napkin. The words were just words. The choice was yours. He reached under the counter and pulled out a cup, filling it with coffee. "Sit down," he said. "You've come a long way." So the Dragon King sat in the old baker's shop. They talked about many things. About Martha and her notes. About Danny and his courage. About the past and the future and all the small moments in between that made up a life. And in the window, a napkin fluttered in the morning breeze. Its message, written in careful handwriting, said simply, "Kindness is the only revolution that never fails." Outside, children were playing in streets that were free. Above, the sky was blue and clear and full of possibility. And somewhere in the universe, on 100 different worlds, beings who had been conquered were beginning to hope again. Not because an empire had fallen, not because a king had changed his mind, but because an old man had believed that words mattered. Because he had put good into the world, one napkin at a time. Because he had shown a monster that it was possible to become something else. Pete Holloway finished his coffee and went back to his dough. There was bread to bake. There was always bread to bake, and there were always more napkins to write.